and I'm now staffing Mr. Benoit.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Mark Taylor, and Board Assistant for Supervisor Ruff.
Tom Groves, Board Consultant for Ben Benoit.
Ron Ketchum, Consultant for the Callan at Santa Barbara.
Nancy Velasquez, Governing Board Liaison.
Bill Glazier, Consultant for Michael Caccio.
Jacob Ake, I'm Consultant for Councilman Joe Buscaino, and I'm also his Deputy Chief of Staff.
Fred Minassian, Board Consultant for Judith Mitchell.
Bay Gilchrist, General Counsel. Nice to meet you.
Sorry.
Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules Division.
And I'm Wayne Nasser, the Executive Officer.
And I'm Jill Wynot, the Chief Operating Officer. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. So what we normally do for these meetings is we jump to the back to the public hearings and we start there. So on page 7, because those are usually the more, I guess, time-consuming discussions or more interesting discussions, and then we'll bounce back to go through the rest of it. So Phil, were you going to talk about the, I'm sorry, no, first is Matt on the technology advancement.
Yeah, so this is an item we bring to the board every year. It's we're required to submit our annual report for our Research Development Administration Deployment Program, which is called the Clean Fields Program. We have an annual report that we submit to the board, and also a plan update, which is a forward-looking research plan for the coming year. And as in past years, we just highlight the amount of funds that we expended, the ratio of funding that we were able to leverage, and then our topics of interest as an upcoming year. And we, again, are focused on near zero emission technologies, in particular on heavy-duty trucks. I'm happy to answer questions.
I know you haven't seen the report yet. There are a number of items outstanding that we're working on to get uploaded as soon as possible.
Matt, does that include a lot of the infrastructure, for the, like, is there a 3- and 5-year plan, or how it relates to specifically the hydrogen, electric?
Yeah, the biggest priority areas that we are focusing on are going to be electric technologies as well as infrastructure, and hydrogen fuel cell technologies. So it combines both the vehicles and the infrastructure. So yes, it includes both. Because we're finding infrastructure is the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing just by the number of trucks that we should move.
Thank you, Matt. Amir, can you please describe the next item on the Reclaim Annual Report?
Yes. Good morning, I'm Ritesh Dash, Deputy Executive Officer for Engineering and Committee. This is also an annual report that we bring to the board for the review and approval. This is the audit report for reclaim facilities for the compliance year 2018. The report basically demonstrates that our reclaim facility complied with their emission targets. The report also assesses the emission reductions, the availability, and also the annual average price for the reclaim trading credits, and also the job impacts for the reclaim facility. Go ahead and start. And with that, I'm going to answer your question.
Thank you. And then, are there any questions for Amir? This is kind of a standard item, and everything looks like we're still doing pretty well there. We're going to stay on page 7 for the item 27, the update on the MOU for marine ports, because that will probably bring a lot of people and a lot of discussions. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, so as many of you know, we've been working with both the ports of Long Beach and Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA on a memorandum of understanding to solidify some of the emission reductions in their Clean Air Action Plan and get SIP credit for that. We've been at it for maybe almost 18 months now, and progress has been slow. So we briefed our Mobile Source Committee, and when you can see the Mobile Source Committee minutes, you'll get a flavor for that, about our progress or lack thereof, and some options that the Mobile Source Committee could consider and maybe give us some direction on, including, maybe in the background working on an indirect source rule, if these MOU negotiations continue to be slow. And one of the big things that's happening is that a big part of the Clean Air Action Plan that the courts adopted in 2017 was this clean truck program, and the major part of that was establishing some kind of tariff or rate that trucks would have to pay to access the ports, but you would get basically a discount or a waiver if you were a zero or near zero emission truck. So they recently released a study that suggested, that's analyzed the impacts of rates between $5 and $70, and the study itself showed that even from all the way up to $70, that the cargo diversion to other ports was pretty modest. Even at $70, it was 1.4%. So that suggested that they can go higher than the $10 rate that they proposed. So there's a lot of discussions going on that. Anyway, so we briefed Mobile Source Committee on where we are, on what they proposed, and Mobile Source Committee members basically said, get back to the grindstone, try to work this out, see what the ports are willing to do, get back and see what we can do in the short term to get the MOU back on track. They also wanted higher level, director level staff in these negotiations, which have already started. We also told the committee that our next step was to go to the full board and brief them. So that's why you see it here. There's a big meeting tomorrow with the executives. So it is possible, depending on progress between now and 8 days from now, that we may not be ready to give this update, but it's on the agenda in case we do. We don't know yet. We don't know how the meetings are going to go tomorrow. There already was a meeting last Friday, and there's a meeting tomorrow. So we're hopeful that we can work this out with the ports. Whoever wants to weigh in.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of background. We had originally planned to go before the board last November. And at the time, we delayed going to the board because the ports were still in the process of completing their study. The study was originally supposed to have looked at behavior modification for bringing in cleaner trucks, then turned into a study on diversion. And so, we understand that sometimes reports take longer than you would like. And so we had agreed to postpone. I think the ports had sort of advised us, from our perspective, with information that wasn't perhaps as complete as we would have liked. And that is in regards to the diversion aspects. So they had told us originally it was going to sort of be at $10 a truck. And at $10 a truck, it was close to $90 million for a fund, which isn't a small amount of funds, but certainly not a level that would really get us where we need to be with regards to replacing the 8,000 port trucks. The challenge that we had was once we saw a draft version of the report, it was where Phil mentioned the diversion rate. When you're looking at from $10 to $70 a ton, there was minimal loss. And so the perspective was there's an opportunity to get much higher funds to really address the replacement or the change out of those 8,000 trucks, which would have a significant air quality impact locally as well as regionally. And so we were very concerned about that. There was a rush by the ports to go to the harbor commissions, a dual meeting to try to set that in place. We felt as if that was not negotiating with us in good faith because they hadn't really discussed it with us, and it was pretty much going to be, we're at $10, take it or leave it. And from that particular perspective, I think that the city of Los Angeles had a tremendous ability to say, wait a minute, let's try to take a moment to reflect on what's really going on here. And so the city of Los Angeles really put it on pause. The city of Long Beach followed that pause immediately. And I think literally within a day or two, Jacob, I think it was almost maybe the same day, when we met with the councilman, Lauren called and said that that it made sense to put the pause on. And so I think the next morning I got a call from Mario Cordero, the executive director for the Port of Long Beach, who came in after our Mobile Source Committee meeting last Friday and basically said, look, we want to work things out. We were under different thoughts. We thought things were fine. I said, well, you hadn't reached out, you hadn't explained any of this to us, and we don't understand it. And if we don't understand it, we can't be supportive of it. The board direction, as Phil said, the committee direction, I should say, as Phil said, was we need to be more engaged directly with the executive leadership of both ports. And at the same time, CARB also has some ongoing issues with the ports. So in our meeting last Friday, I'd characterize it as very positive. Mario Cordero was there Gene wasn't able to make it, but Chris Cannon was there. And there was a discussion about a number of different factors that we found very positive and encouraging. And so we agreed that the executive directors would be leading the next few meetings, and we would meet on a weekly basis to the extent that we can. In addition, Richard Corey is going to participate. He's the executive director for CARB. And I haven't had a chance to tell this to Phil yet, but Hector Delatorre, who is also a CARB board member, will be participating in the meeting tomorrow. So you've got CARB board representation, CARB executive leadership, as well as the executive leadership of the ports and us. So we're optimistic. We think there's some really good things that we can try, and we can do it in a much broader, coordinated fashion. And we'll be, if it's positive, we'll be bringing this update to the full board to report back on the direct involvement on the executive leadership and where we stand in those negotiations. If we don't have a good meeting tomorrow, we may decide to pull the item, but that's where we stand.
I just want to say real quickly that Wayne and Phil, thank you for, it's a complicated issue, it's been crazy, a little bit of emotional roller coaster I think sometimes too, and the communication hasn't been always the best. There's so many parties involved, but after we met and consulted with the mayor's office and trying to connect with our friends in the Port of Long Beach, and per your suggestion of pressing pause, it made a lot of sense to try to rehash and try to figure out what is that balance that we can have that would meet the goals that we need to do sooner than later. But also thank you for bringing in CARB. I think, if they made a rule a long time ago, this wouldn't be a discussion and then we'd be implementing a fee and it'd be done. So it'd be good to see Hector and their team there to see what their commitment's going to be in a quick order, not just coming down and saying, Port of LA, we think you have authority and you should do the other things, but
They're going to say that too, though.
But they need to step up too.
Right.
So that's,
Right.
It's easy for them to push us to blaze the path forward and deal with the politics of it, and then they come in afterwards and say, oh, LA's doing this, so LA and Long Beach are doing this, so we're gonna do the same thing. It needs to be the reverse. But thank you so much, Wayne, for pushing and educating us and bringing a lot of the parties to the table. I'm confident we will get there, but obviously we've made a commitment as well, so we'll be working very closely with you.
Well, I appreciate that, and both Mario and Gene expressed that, actually Mario called me, I guess it was Monday or Tuesday, and said that that pause button is only going till March 9th. And I said, well, we better get to work because we got a lot to do before then.
Right.
He agreed, so I guess it was Monday, they decided to go to the
Yeah,
joint on March 9th?
I should have texted you, I'm sorry, but yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We knew we had a short
Communication's
call.
my bad too, so I'll accept some responsibility.
No, it's good.
We'll blame Phil.
Yeah, it's all Phil's fault. Fred?
I was at the Mobile Source Committee. I heard that presentation, which was pretty good. There was talk about the container fee, $10 to $70. And then there was a slide that showed there are 8,000 trucks that are pre-2010. And to prevent those, that was one of Judith Mitchell's concerns, to prevent those from
Going to diesel.
being converted to a 0.2 gram diesel. Meanwhile, has there been any thought in the MOU to include, beside the tariff fund, that whatever number you're going to agree, say $30, $40, whatever, also put an emission limit there of 0.02 grams or lower? So that way, I was thinking like, even if you agree on a container fee of say $30, they said $10 generates 90 million. So with $30, you're going to have 270 to close to $300 million. With Moyer 8923, whatever money, 400 million a year, you can replace all those 8,000 trucks within the next 2 years before 2023, if that emission limit is included there. Truck drivers will have a very nice deal if they get $100,000 per truck. It's going to be cheap for them. they're gonna save on fuel cost, natural gas versus diesel, so that $30 or $40 tariff or fee is not gonna become that burdensome. But if you put a 0.02 gram limit there, it's gonna make our case here much more solid to make sure those trucks are not replaced with diesel.
Fred, it's good to have you back.
So some great points, and they were all discussed on last Friday when we met with Mario and the reps from the Port of LA. So one thing that, this whatever the rate is, the ports are saying that this will not be something the truck driver actually has to pay. They're going to find a way to put it on the cargo owner, which makes sense, which makes a lot of sense. Second thing is we would love to see a number like 0.02 in the MOU, but there's a legal theory that the ports are going off of that they can't put that number in there until CARB sets a new engine standard at that level, not an optional standard, but an actual regulatory standard. Now, we don't agree with that legal theory. CARB doesn't agree with that legal theory, but it's been hard to get them off of that. So if they're not going to get off of it, we need to reference that CARB standard, maybe without a number, which is a point of discussion. But what you're talked about these 8, just so everyone knows, there's the CARB has a truck and bus rule that in 2023, there will not be allowed to be any trucks prior to 2010 on the road in California. In-state, out-of-state, they're just not allowed. So right now there's about almost 8,000 trucks that are in the drayage registry, trucks that visit the ports, that are actively visiting the ports, that are pre-2010. Before 2023, those trucks will have to change out. And in the absence of regulations or other incentives, they will be buying diesel, essentially 2014 diesel. And those trucks are going to last another 10 or 15 years. That is such an opportunity. These are highly polluting trucks, and rather than just going to 0.2 to get them to 0.02 or 0, it's almost 7 tons a day, which is enormous if we can get them all. So in our discussions with the ports, there was general idea was let's focus on those 8,000 trucks. Those are the trucks they're responsible for. They come to the ports. There's a huge opportunity. The problem is we need it's not.
George's here.
Oh, what was the dollar amount to get that in 2 years? It was almost $500 million, right?
Well, I think we said if you go after the active 320 trucks,
Yeah.
you said 7,000 out of 8,000, you actually need about $1 billion if you assume $150,000.
Yeah. There's some question at how much you have to incentivize, whether it's 100 or 150, and then the truck rate itself should provide an additional push so people don't have to pay that fee.
2 years, you should be able to do most of them.
You're right. So the discussion is let's focus on that. The rate is one way to raise money to do that. Are there other ways? Are there other things they can do with the registry? What are all the ways we can tackle those 8,000 trucks? So that's where the discussion, hopefully tomorrow, focuses on. We might be able to take some of our money and bring that to bear, do some kind of matching. One thing the Port of Long Beach mentioned, and they said they've done this before, I wasn't aware of it, is actually if they set a rate and they know they're going to collect it for 3 or 4 years, there's a way that they can bring the cash forward, essentially work their budget to bring the cash forward. So even though it might not be enough year by year, but if there's a way they can bring the cash forward. So those are the kinds of things we're going to be discussing tomorrow.
But I think, sorry, one more thing, I'm done. The 0.02 is not in an MOU. MOU is not the regulation, it's not the rule. I don't see why it cannot be there, number one. Number two, if they are very insistent on that, why then don't you go the route of mentioning the fuel type, whether it's going to be natural gas or electricity, battery fuels or whatever, those type of things. So that by itself, if that's what they have to do, then the 0.02 or lower will be an automatic,
That's a good idea. I think they're reluctant to mention fuel type as well, for
Yeah,
other
my
reasons.
concern is the technology, I don't want to call it bias, but technology designation aspect that they would cry on that one. As opposed to technology, I don't care what technology is. We know that some of the advanced diesel technology, they can get down to 0.02, it's just the time frame, right? But those are good points, and I think we're trying to do everything we can on that, Fred. And we'll talk with him. Ron, I know you were next.
I want to go back to that slide. I had a couple of questions.
Which slide?
the 8,000 truck slide that
The
Fred was
mobile
talking
source
about.
committee.
Yeah.
They have 4 areas. It says 0 moves, infrequent, semi-frequent, frequent. What do those mean?
Sorry, if you want
It basically, it means the number of
Containers.
um,
How often they
trips
move.
they take to the port per day. I think frequent means, 3 to 4 TEUs per day. And then it goes down from frequent to
Okay.
semi-frequent to non-frequent.
The other question, this .02, I think basically you're only talking about natural gas for most trucks. I don't see the electric being in the picture. And are you talking about out-of-state trucks also?
no, these are rarely out-of-state trucks that visit the ports.
Well, but on the CARB rule.
At the 8,000.
On the CARB rule, are they talking about, you said out-of-state trucks have to comply too?
With the current CARB's truck and bus rule, the .2, not the .02.
Oh, the .2, okay.
And it's not as big a deal as people think. The interstate trucks are generally a newer fleet, so they're generally much less than 13 years old. So, yeah, there'll be a few.
Because about half the fleet, half the trucks on the road, I think, are out-of-state.
Yeah, but most of them are newer than 2010. Or will be in 3 years.
Yeah, 11,000 trucks out of state?
No.
No, a lot more than that.
Not more than that.
How much? You know?
200,000, I would think. Yeah, because it's 400,000.
Yeah,
It's
almost
Total.
total for this, yeah. the
400, yeah.
In the registry.
Yeah, I mean, that will be an impact on some of the out-of-state trucks that are older, but the out-of-state trucks tend to do like 1 million miles in a few
It
years.
seems,
So,
for those that are older, then you're looking at maybe impacting the supply chain, which would be raising interstate commerce concerns and lawsuits.
you're talking about the CARB's truck and bus rule?
CARB, but not the CARB.
Yeah, we can't control that, but they're not looking to do another truck and bus rule. They're doing a new engine standard. So truck and bus rule is the existing fleet. They are looking at fleet rules that apply to in-state fleets, which they do have authority over.
The 8,000 normally stay within the region itself and to warehouses that are transloading, and then they'll long distance truck. 60% of the goods stay within Southern California, so when they're transloaded, Toys R Us come, or not, they're not around anymore, but at Costco, they'll separate out and send it to different stores when they transload. So the bulk of them do stay here. So the goal of 8,000 is a good one to hit. But I think it was a previous slide, and I forgot which topic it was, but we did show numbers on the benefits of local, the state, and then interstate commerce, the number of trucks. And I know that's where CARB really comes in again, because the big bang for your buck is statewide, including the interstate commerce.
Tom?
Yeah, I know this is a little difficult, but is it possible to kind of read through the tea leaves to see, does it appear that there's a little more willingness to recognize that the $10 is it's just not even going to get you there? They're going to have to do something. And do they see that? And if so, what are they thinking they might be able to go up to?
I think it's premature for us to opine on that one.
Okay.
Tomorrow we'll have a much better sense.
If you pull the item, what are the next steps?
We'll still continue to engage. We'll come back and brief the committee on sort of where our thoughts are. It just depends. Yeah.
So just to follow up on part of Tom's question there, at the Mobile Source Committee, there was some dispute on the credibility of the findings between AQMD and the ports, the credibility of the findings of the economic study. With the meetings that took place later that day, were you guys able to kind of come closer together on rectifying those disputes?
Yeah, so remember, this is the port's own study that they commissioned. It was not our study. We're just taking exactly what that study said. The port's claim is that essentially don't look at the numbers, just look at the narrative in the study, which talks about all these other challenges, but it's very anecdotal and qualitative. So the ports say that tomorrow they'll share with us some more information beyond what the rate study suggests that shows some of the challenges they have with going with a higher rate. But we have not seen that, And if you look at the draft rate study, there's a lot of discussion about challenges, but it's very broad, qualitative, and anecdotal. So they're going to try to convince us that going higher is going to be difficult, and to look beyond the rate study. But the rate study kind of speaks for itself and has a lot of good information in there about cargo diversion and why we still believe that the industry can handle a higher rate and the diversion would be very low. But I think, again, getting back to focusing on those 8,000 trucks, which is this target of opportunity, and figuring out how through money and whatever other incentives or regulations can be brought to bear or restrictions can be brought to bear, can we get those 8,000 trucks done?
So the other point, let me just interject for a second here, is that in the discussion that we had last week, the point that we had made was that we were looking at a broad range of issues in discussion with the ports. And as of, I'll say, the last few weeks, we were down to the trucks. It's all about the trucks. And so from that perspective, we felt as if we'd given up quite a bit. What came through the meeting that we had with the ports last Friday afternoon was, while they are, I would say, pretty focused on what their own findings mean, and that's that $10 rate, the point that I made was that if that's the case, then we need to look at everything because we're not getting all the things that we need. So that means cargo handling equipment is opened up. We need to look at how this is funded because if we get more funding, maybe there's things that we can do to help match. So there's a lot of different factors that are now back in play. And that's why I said I have no idea until tomorrow sort of where all that's going. But there's a lot of other issues that we're looking at.
Well, one question that Councilman Rodriguez had coming out of that was the volume, the container volume that was going through our ports versus competing ports around the country and up and down the West Coast. And so we got some data on that from the American Association of Port Authorities, put their port cargo growth from 2006 to 2019. And over that period of time, San Pedro Bay ports was a growth of 8%. And for instance, Virginia was a growth of 44%, and Savannah was a growth of 113%. So there is a.
But you got to look at those numbers, right? Because the numbers were very low in comparison to where the Port of LA Long Beach are.
I'm just saying, this is probably some data that's probably going to be,
they already talked about it with us.
Brought into the discussion if it hasn't already. So I just kind of wanted to bring that out. And in fact, San Pedro Bay ports are the only port in this study, at least, that had a declining volume between 2018 and 2019. So there's something different about these ports as opposed to everybody else.
If you look at their own study, there's some clues in there as to what's different.
Okay.
This port is very inefficient at getting containers onto rail for the rest of the country. So a lot of what these other ports have is they started out small so they can build their terminals in a way that gets the stuff onto rail quickly. Our ports don't have a lot of on-dock rail. They have to get drayage to take it to the rail yards that are off-site. There's traffic, there's hours involved, and our ports aren't so good at getting the containers off the ships very fast. But when we see the potential diversion, it would be rail. The other ports are eating their lunch on rail, and until they enhance the rail infrastructure, that's going to continue to happen. On the truck side, the containers that come out of this port on the truck side really only serve maybe to the Rockies, right? It serves the Western U.S. I mean, they're bringing parts to factories throughout that go to the rest of the country. But the first stop is usually west of the Rockies on trucks, because rail is more efficient to get it further out. So it's that truck piece. And the other ports, it's very hard for the other ports to compete on that truck container traffic west of the Rockies. Even Vancouver, even Seattle, they're focusing on rail, on putting this stuff on rail across the country. So there's details in that rate study, in the appendices, that have these discussions that are very useful to put all those numbers in context.
Thank you.
I want to point out something on the rail. We had a rail project. It was called SPIG. And this district sued us over it, and it's dead. And so I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of things in the works that we got to work on, and It's not 100% dead, but let's figure out a way to breathe some life back into that. And I don't know if UNSF and the port are going to still do it. Pure V's underworks now in the Port of Long Beach, which it's just like SCIG and the City of LA supported. But there has to be some give and take. I'm not saying that we're going to give into tier 1 trains, but part of that can be the discussion we have tomorrow. Is working some of these out. But we've had several rail projects. We got to figure that out quickly.
Point taken. Thanks, Jacob.
One other, if the rate was $50 per container, in 2 years, you would raise enough money to replace those 8,000 trucks. Would you
Almost.
Well, you have it in your presentation, it said 5% for administrative, so I don't know what else there is.
No,
Anyway,
that's
almost.
close, yeah.
Once you have raised that money, would you sunset that fee?
Well, there's still work to do, but that's something, we
I mean, you
discuss
should,
it.
because the point is to replace these pre-2010 trucks. Once that's done.
But Ron, I would
sunset.
get to the point that I just made, which was the trucks are a large component, but there are other components within the
Right,
port.
but you're doing only
So
with
cargo.
trucks here.
Well, that's not what the negotiations are about. Because last week I opened it back up to everything, especially if it's going to be at the $10 rate. If it's going to be at a $50 rate, then that's different. That's all part of the discussions.
Good.
So I don't know where we stand. We'll know better tomorrow.
And those 8,000 trucks are just the ones that are ripe for replacement, because they have to replace them by 2023. We still need to get all those other trucks in the basin that are.
Even the
currently
post-2010
22.
trucks.
Well, it shouldn't be on the port to.
Well, they have another 8,000 trucks that are post-2014.
Well, about 6,000 would be between 2010, it'd be 0.2, but not 0.02 or 0. So those still need to be turned over too. Plus, the longer the rate goes on, there's less need to incentivize it as much, because if they have to pay that rate for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, then that goes into the calculation of whether they buy the used diesel or the 0 near 0.
Any other comments on this?
Just one quick question. The 8,000 trucks, there's an inventory. Are they independent owner operators? Are they, we know the percentage or breakdown. We know there's 8,000. So are these mom and pops? Are these, 3, 5 truck operations?
We know there's a fair amount that are independent.
Might even be the majority.
Okay. Because that would be obviously, again.
And that's a challenge.
You get into the small business world of,
Well, the port's perspective on that was that they want to try to keep the funding that goes directly for the truck itself, so that the actual owner wouldn't even have to touch it. They would pay. That was one of the points that they made to us. So that's something that they're very cognizant of.
All right. Okay, so then we can turn back to page 2 and start talking about consent calendar items. Minutes are still outstanding, so Naveen, would you walk us through item 2?
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry to speak to you about, but I'm Matthew Savage, Deputy for Science and Technology example. I didn't mean to make you leave.
No.
But speaking
Get
of
some
trucks, this first project is we applied for an award to the California Energy Commission to replace older diesel trucks with near zero natural gas. We used a Prop 1B backup list. We got the ports to chip in funds. This was kind of that early adopter program with the ports. But what's happened is some of those fleets are no longer interested for various reasons, financial reasons mostly. And so all we're asking is to substitute those trucks with different trucks. So it's a no change of funds, we're just substituting the fleets. Or to again replace older diesel trucks with near zero natural gas. The next item is our annual Moyer solicitation. So this is the 22nd year of the Moyer program. So we're going to open up the solicitation to accept proposals. It's also for the SIM, which is the off-road Moyer program. And then we are also transferring $3 million into our VIP, which is a Voucher Incentive Program to help small fleets. And we're recognizing $37 million for the Moyer program. That's another issue, is that if we're hoping to add on to what the Port is gonna do in the MOU, we typically only get about 30, it'll go up in subsequent years, but, we only have about 30 to 50 million per year in mortar. So if the ports are looking for us to shoulder a large burden as part of the MOU with the truck replacements, we only have about that. It's fitness and big workload. So that's a normal item. The next one, number 4, is we're simply recognizing administrative funds under the VW program. So as you may recall, the 3 big districts were asked to administer the VW mitigation trust fund statewide. Our category is the combustion category. It's currently open. The ARB is now releasing administrative funds so we can do the website, fund staff, and do the program statewide. So we're simply recognizing these funds into the VW trust account. There are no other questions. The 5th item was also taken to tech committee, and this is a research project to enhance our inventories for NOx emissions. As we found in the 2016 AQMD, and we need to shore up those inventories in order to do more accurate modeling. And so this is simply executing a contract with the support that we could do those flight studies and get the information for our inventories. And then the final item that I have is item 6. So we applied for and were awarded a DERE grant, the Emission Reduction Act, funding through the EPA. At the time, we also used AQMD as the backup list to fund those trucks. Those trucks are no longer available, or rather, we applied for drayage trucks, so those that go into and out of the ports. What we'd like to do is fund non-drayage for goods related trucks, and the EPA has accepted that modification. That's my items.
I don't see any questions for Matt on those items. Thank you. And Sujata, do you have the next 2 items?
Yes, this item number 7 is to execute a contract with BCA Watson Rice, the CPAs, and to do our annual financial audit for the next 3 years. They were our current auditors, and admin committee recommended going with them for another 3 years.
How long have we had? How long?
Just 3 years.
They've been 3 years, so this is an additional.
Any questions on that? And so the next item, item number 8, is to approve this is standard annual approval, approve the annual investment policy and delegation of authority to LA County to be our treasurer to invest our funds in the food sector. Any questions on that?
Okay, thank you. Derek, you have the next item, item number 9.
So this item is to extend the high school program, what we call the WHAM program, Why Healthier Matters program. Originally, the board approved it back in 2019 to get it to 100 schools, and we got into 200 schools. And so this is just extending that contract for another year to get into another 100 schools.
Can we get a list of those schools?
I'll get you a list. I can give you a breakdown of how many schools are in each county. We did extensive outreach to schools in all the districts, or all the counties. We were successful in LA County, got into 46 schools, 15 schools in Orange County, 14 in Riverside County, and 24 in San Bernardino County. I'll get you a list of schools.
That would be good to.
Do the schools actually apply for those?
So no, so what we did was, there was criteria set up for the ones we're going to go try to get into the schools, and that was 8617. They were 2588 communities, and there was 4 other criteria. 8617 and 2588 were the highest priorities.
Very good.
Basically, environmental justice schools.
Thanks, Chris.
If you can get the list of Carlos and I too, that'd be great.
Sure.
But when it says effective performance, how is performance gauged?
So performance will be gauged on how many schools that the contractor got us into, and they got us into 100%, 100 schools. So I would say it's pretty effective. We've got volunteers here from the district to go teach classes. Some of the schools wanted volunteers, and others wanted to teach Next, and then I have the next item too. And that's for the right to breathe. This item is to authorize purchase order for another 12 months of Google AdWords for about $500,000. To date, 2019, we had 41.7 million impressions, 20 million views, over 78,000 viewers are clicking on the video. 1.4 million of those views, they viewed it for at least 45 seconds.
Is that on YouTube?
It's on YouTube. The right to breathe is on YouTube.
And the next item is to conduct the annual meeting of the Health Effects of Air Pollution Foundation, and the staff will be presenting an annual report that outlines the research supported by the foundation over the past year, plans for the future, and a financial report. Questions on that?
Bounce back to you, Derek. We have item 12. Oh, I'm sorry. Items 12 through 19 are information receive and file. Does anyone have any questions on the items on page 5?
Do we have any update on it was mentioned about the new AB 2722, is that the number?
There's no
22.
update. There's no author as of yet.
Okay, thank you. And then continuing on to page 6, any questions on the remaining consent calendar items?
I have one.
Sure.
In the Mobile Source Committee, which several of us attended, there was a very good briefing on air quality, which I guess is done once a year. I'm not sure why it's never presented to the board, but it seems like it would be a good idea. I see a couple, because you probably know, I go into that data and take a look at things, especially on air quality, and I noticed that there's an area. It wasn't a real rosy picture anyway on the air quality presentation, but I see a couple of unintended consequences for some of the inland areas, county areas. One of them is that if you go from the east San Diego Valley all the way over to Redlands, there's been and I looked at a 5-year average beginning in 2003 all the way up to 2019. And for that 20-some year period, there's been a general increase in the number of days in which this area has had exceedances of 0.07. Every other area, significant decreases, but for these areas, significant, what I would consider significant, like 20% or 25% increase in the number of days exceeding the 0.07. And going, because I'm retired, I can do this. And going into the data even further, there's an interesting thing going on here. The further east you go, and I look at 8 stations from Azusa all the way over to India. Further east you go, and I look at 0.073 to 0.076 days in 2019. That a typical station in LA County and in San Bernardino County, when they reach those levels, it will stay there for like 3 hours. The further you go, it goes up to as much as 8 hours. So like Indio, when they hit 0.073 or 0.076, that level will stay there upwards to 8 hours in Indio. And in Crestline and Canning, you're looking at about an average of 5 to 6 hours, which means that people are in an unhealthful air quality significantly longer than people in LA County or Orange County. Well, Orange County virtually never has any exceedances. But I saw a couple of instances in Banning and in Crestline in 2017 where they exceeded the federal 0.07 for 40 hours straight. Started in the afternoon, went through the night, and it went on right into the next day, which means those people had 40 hours of being in unhealthful air quality, no break. And I just say, I don't know what that means, but I suspect it's due to the low NOx environment. But staff may will look at that.
Thanks for the
Thank you,
information.
Ron. Okay, then also on page 6, we start the board calendar. Any questions on the first 3 committee items? And then there's 3 more committee items on the top of page 7. Any questions or comments on those?
On 23, we withdrew, was the bill withdrawn? Was HR 2616 withdrawn, or did we withdraw our?
We didn't present it.
Okay.
There was an issue with notification on that?
Okay.
So that concludes the review of the agenda. Is there any other business? Okay, don't see any public comment. I don't see any either. Okay, so we will go ahead and adjourn, and thank you all very much.
Before we adjourn, I just wanted to make one point. I sent out an update on the Marathon Refinery incident this morning. You all should have received that. As you know, we've been engaged from the moment we were aware of this situation. We'll continue to provide those reports so long as there's useful information.
And thank you for getting those out so quickly and with such great detail.
It wasn't as quick as we would have liked. We will do better. This incident, because it happened at such a late hour, was probably one of the first ones, at least during the time that I've been here, where it was literally off hours, and we learned a lot. And we'll actually probably be coming back to the board with some suggestions with regards to how we respond to these and some of the resource needs that will go into that. That was it. Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you too.